please join me in welcoming Lisa Joy. I think I'll just start by saying thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being at MAMI. Thank you for being in Mumbai. It is lovely to have you.
It's such a pleasure to be here. It is a lifelong dream to visit India, and so I've been making the most of it. I've traveled all over the country. It's great.
Are you ready to drop some wisdom?
Well, I can drop my version of experience, which might be wisdom. You can learn from my failings.
I want to start by talking about world building, which is a term that gets thrown around a lot. And not enough is said about sort of what that tangibly looks like. But I want to start by quoting something you said, and I think the session is going to be a lot of quoting you back at yourself, so I apologize in advance. You said, the magic of a really great movie or really great TV series is that they never lose their luster, and they still have the ability to leave you awestruck with wonder and make you think, no matter how old you are when you watch them. And I think your work in particular really encapsulates that, because you really transport us to these fantastical, often futuristic worlds, whether it's through Pushing Daisies, which is where you started your career as a writer, whether it's through your show on Amazon, The Peripheral, which you're a producer, whether it's through a little show you guys might have heard of called Westworld, which you co-created, whether it's through Reminiscence, your film from 2021 starring Hugh Jackman. And I want to talk about Reminiscence and Westworld in particular, because they're such richly realized, very visual worlds. And with Westworld, to put it very simply, it's about a futuristic world where robots are gaining sentience. Reminiscence takes place in a dystopian future where cities are sinking and the world has gone to shit and people get around by boat because of climate change, and people are sort of living in the past and choosing to relive their memories because there's no hope left in the real world. So when you're ideating and imagining these worlds, what does world building really look like? How much detail are you really capturing on paper and sort of in deciding what these worlds look and feel like and how they function?
I think it's funny because I'm a terrible, terrible actress. The last time I acted in anything, I played broccoli in a school play. I was literally a vegetable. Because I'm scared of acting and rather stage fright. But I do think that when you're writing, there's something about being a sort of theoretical actor. You sit there in your mind, clothed in the body of a different character from a faraway land, or it could be a different gender, it could be, from the future or the past. And for me, world creation is about inhabiting the eyes of that character and looking around at the world, and seeing what's there. So I kind of do it from a very micro to macro way, and I think also I do a lot of research, read a lot of philosophy, look at other people's works, but I think to create the future or any kind of world that is believable, you have to look at the trajectory of the now and see where it's going. I do think that it's impossible to create any near future scenario without taking into account global warming. It seems like a heightened conceit in Reminiscence, but it's not so heightened. I had my honeymoon in the Maldives, and I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to go back there for, my future anniversaries. So I think it's just a combination of that kind of projection of self mixed with study.
But if we were a fly on the wall watching you in this process, what are we looking at? Is it endless typing? Is it sort of massive whiteboards covered? Like, what does that really look like when you're creating worlds?
Oh, it looks like a madhouse. It looks absolutely bonkers. So I like to draw a lot when I'm breaking, and I also think there's a certain rhythm or shape for me that a story has. People talk about the 3-act structure. It looks like this, but I think you can also feel like in music, right? There's a verse and there's a chorus and there's a pre-verse. There's something almost a priori about the way in which we look forward to, there's going to be an inversion here or a minor key. And you don't necessarily know what it will look like, but you can feel this tide that says, oh, some shift could happen here. And if it doesn't, the story gets slow, or it's time to learn something new about a character. To me, it's about feeling some kind of rhythm in a story. And of course, the best stories find new places to interject new rhythms and subvert expectations, and that's wonderful, you know. But the way that I do it tends to be because I'm visually oriented, and also I like to doodle a lot, which helps me for some reason. I feel like my pen is moving even if my mind has stopped creating words. So I use a whiteboard for the most part, and and draw all over that. But when we were doing Westworld, I was pregnant when we started breaking it. And we had this one room that was supposed to be the nursery, but at that moment had nothing in it. And we filled the whiteboard. And then we just kept filling more and more papers and taping them to the walls. And then we taped them to the windows. And by the time we were done, the entire room looked like an insane asylum because it was just plastered in papers everywhere with different strings of causality and different timelines. You know, we thought of it as though we were making a watch, you know, where all the gears have to move together. So even though sometimes you wouldn't see some of the thinking on screen, I think in order to find the story, we had to do a lot of extra work imagining, you know, what are the loops of the characters that play the robots? You know, like where does the storyline within this go? Where does Hector intercept with this and that and this and that? So we had a whole kind of meta story broken. And then over that, we put what happens then when you have this clock that's smoothly running and then something like sentience starts to develop and corporate shenanigans and things like that. And from there, we layered out versions of the stories and, of course, timelines.
I think there's something quite sweet about the idea that one of the most ambitious shows ever made started with doodling. I think it's oddly hopeful.
It gave my baby, too, by the time she was born, because we were still working on it then. It was long labor of love was Westworld and the creation of my actual daughter. But she would sit there because we were still writing in this little rocker, and Jonah and I would stare at the whiteboard, just stumped, trying to think. And my poor baby, for like a year, was transfixed by whiteboards. Whenever she saw one, she'd be like, I should stare at this thing because this holds endless fascination for my parents.
So she was your first audience.
Yes.
I want to shift gears and talk about the Indian landscape for a second. We were discussing yesterday about how here traditionally it's been all about movies that sort of reign supreme, and in the last sort of 6-7 years we've seen the start of series and I guess what you could call cinematic series through streaming platforms. And as a result, a lot of people, writers and filmmakers who've always just thought in terms of feature films, you know, structurally, storytelling-wise, are now trying to adapt and think in terms of shows, given that as with many places, the new mid-budget movie is now the show. So for those people, what advice would you have, because you mentioned rhythms and stories, so what advice would you have in terms of, I'm someone who's always thought in terms of features, that's been my world, that's my structure, apart from the fact that I'm just splitting it up into chapters, what advice would you have in terms of trying to pivot and tell stories through episodes and seasons?
Yeah, they're very different crafts and rhythms in a way, right? With a feature, it's almost like a short story, right? You can go in there and paint the most evocative portrait, but there are questions left to the viewer's imagination too, right? Backstories, etc. And all those tributaries that a story opens up that you don't answer in a feature, and artfully so, in the sense of a series, you get to explore, right? So it just changes the nature of the form and what that art looks like. So I think when writing a series, it's for me, it's important to know where it's going, right? To know the kind of tentpole moments throughout a series, right? So nowadays there's 6 episode seasons, 8 episode seasons. It used to be 22, 23, which was madness. It was madness. That's mostly possible when you're doing a procedural, right? Something like Law and Order, or something where it's not mythology based, so you aren't like if anybody's life is that dramatic that they can do 23 episodes of it, like even the Khaleesi didn't have that much drama in her life, you know? So it lends itself more to this kind of format, which is an enjoyable format, you know, but it's very different. When it's based solely on mythology and it's not procedural, I think that's when you have to look at it in your break. Before I break an episode, I break the season, right? I look at, you know, basically six columns on a whiteboard if there's 6 episodes. And I know the general things that I want to happen, the turns and the reveals, and I kind of put those in their respective columns. And that's just the starting off point, right? Because as you write, it never stays the same. It never really stays that way. Some of the major turns will stay that way, but the characters and the different things you find in production will change the course of it and grow it. I mean, and there's also those episodes where you had a kind of white space. You had a space to explore. One of my favorite episodes is one that we did, I think it was 2nd season, and it was about the Native Americans in Westworld. And it was all in, you know, their dialect, and it was a very standalone episode, just looking at Akichita and his lover. And that felt more like within the trappings of TV, we were able to make a little film, right? Because that was a one-off thing, but it had a beginning, a middle, and an end. And we were able to explore that. And that's also really lovely when that chance comes in, because there are times in TV when you feel like you have to put so much plot in, you have to rush. TV is all about rushing. The schedule is brutal, much more brutal than film. And so when you get to take your time and be more poetic with your camera moves and more add like white spaces into it, it's actually really, really lovely.
I definitely want to ask you about brutal scheduling, but first, I thought it would be really helpful to go through the life cycle of creating a single show, because, like I said, it's still a relatively new format here, and I think there's a lot of young writers can learn from what ideal looks like. So let's start with pitching. You are a writer, so you have pitched plenty in the past. You're a producer, so you get pitched to as well. What does a great pitch look like, and how much of the show would you hope is fleshed out on paper? I mean, how many seasons are you looking at? How much detail are you really hoping is in that pitch?
This is a very good question. Okay, so are a lot of people here writers? Yeah? Okay, so I can like go into like some detail and it will be helpful. Okay. So for a pitch, I think they're very important. And it's, even if you don't have a formal pitch, like even if you're later talking about the show to the network, just getting them excited about it, like all of it, your ability to advertise and sell your own show is very, very important. It also kind of almost helps you think about the marketing campaign later, right? You're trying to figure out what is that special hook of this show. And so to know that identity, to have it be able to pop is actually really helpful, you know? So I do enjoy, I think of pitching not only as, you know, selling it to the man, which of course it is, but it's also about refining, for me, what the parts of my story are that pop and are unique, and testing it on a small audience. I think the first thing, everybody does this differently. For me, there are several categories that I put into a pitch. One, you know, you introduce yourself and the project and the highest of, you know, the highest level of terms, right? And everybody does this differently, but this is generally what I do, and when I'm producing, how I advise people to do it, right? So if I'm producing somebody, I'll introduce the writer for them, because it's easier to speak glowingly of someone that's not yourself, right? It's a little awkward when you're like, I'm so inspired. And so then, you know, the writer might say, oh, I was drawn to this story because of X, right? Just one little nugget of like, why are you passionate about this? Why you for this project instead of him or her? And I do think that, you know, TV is such a brutal industry that in success, which everybody dreams of, but then you're saddled with a show that will eat your life for years, right? So hopefully you truly are passionate about that, right? Because God forbid you get lucky on that show you're not passionate about. It's, it's tough. So to have that passion stated succinctly, then I kind of do an overview of the world a little bit. And one of the things that I do when I'm pitching is, instead of doing it somewhat didactically, like it's a world in the future, there are flying cars, and there's this girl who's a gamer, and she goes into a game and finds herself in a different world, right? I instead tell a story, think of it as a short story, like Flynn wakes up to the sound of her vacuum cleaner, hovering across the carpet of her shitty trailer home, right? She's that all-American girl who's got nothing in her life right now except for a sick mom and a crush on a boy who doesn't even know she exists. The only thing she's got going for her is, Fly Girl, the alter ego that she has in a sim, a video game called X, right? Like, you paint a picture and tell a story and give it a cliffhanger, right? So by the end of the story, it's like, and she goes into the world and bam, gets shot in the head. Next thing you know, she's up in her own life and she says, I gotta go back, right? So, I just skipped to the end and I'm making something up on the fly, so it's not very good. But what you're trying to do is entrance your audience. They hear 30 pitches a day, right? So to be able to speak in an alive, living, excited way where you paint a picture and they can actually see that world, I think is a very helpful selling point.
Sorry, can I just ask, in that example that you just gave, it sounds like you are you're sort of allowing us to explore the world through the story.
Yes.
Because oftentimes sort of a lot of pitches are, here's a page or paragraph or whatever on the world, sort of separate, and then here's a story.
Yes.
You try and do both together.
And I try to give a vignette into the world, right? Where it's like you're giving them a cold open, but you're just painting it with words. And you're trying to get them, like a viewer, like you're literally painting a picture. And I had this theory when I was a lawyer that if you have a case, no matter what the evidence is, if you can get the jury to laugh once and you can get them to cry once, you will win, right? And it's maybe an indictment of the American legal system, but we can talk about that later. But I think the same is so for pitches, right? If you get them just kind of appreciating it abstractly, I'm not sure it's enough because they see so many shows. But if you get them to crack up once or nod like they're relating, or you get them to be like, oh, like, feel something in that pitch, then I think you have a much higher chance of success because you reach something visceral within them. So that's why I tell this story. Now, after that, I still do the rest of the stuff, but it's after having kind of whetted the appetite. So, I'll be like, and then, she wakes up and says, I got to go back in, right? This is the world. There's future London, which is characterized by this, and there's this world, which is characterized by this. And here are her friends who, this person's like this, and then you kind of colorfully describe these people and the mise en scène. You can even describe a little bit of the shooting style, right? Like if I'm doing something that has fighting in it, right? I really like fight scenes, but I'll try to explain why is this kind of fight scene going to look different from a different kind of fight scene. What about it will be more than just a montage of punches and kicks. So I think that's it. At the end, after talking about the world, talking about the characters, you can talk about generally where the season is going to go. I think that's like, a couple pages. Generally, a pitch is about 7 to 12 pages, I would say. You start to lose people after that anyway. And then if you want to, you can talk about theme, right? Which I like to keep short because it's very airy-fairy, but in my experience, networks love theme because it's something that they can talk about. They're like, I love that theme. And it's like non-specific enough that they can really just dive on into that theme, right? Like the theme of eternal love, the theme of,
It's always trauma. Nowadays, it's just always trauma.
Yes, exactly, exactly. But so talking about the theme and in some way hinting at, saying, not hinting, you're being quite explicit about why is this important today, right? Why is this story why is the theme of this going to reach people? So I kind of tend to wrap it up with that.
Can I just say that's a show I would watch the hell out of? A lawyer defending a serial killer who makes a jury laugh. I would watch that. The other aspect of pitching I wanted to ask you about was if you're a young, I think this applies both to you receiving pitches as well as pitching to platforms. Are there sort of specific red flags you look for, either from a streaming executive or from someone pitching to you, where you're like that immediately tells you that no, there's some sort of, there's something that puts me off about this?
Okay, so for someone pitching to me, I would say when they're talking about it, if they can't weave a compelling story that's exciting sounding, and this is where I go into it's a bit like a short story when you're first pitching it, right? We're storytellers, you're trying to tell a story. So to have something a little bit artful as a hook going in shows, oh, this person can write, or this person has an eye for entering a story or catching the reader's attention. So that always helps me to know, basically, this person has a way with words, right? As opposed to doing a very dry version of that. And then the other thing that I think is very, very tricky is a lot of people have great ideas, but don't really know how to land the plane, right? Don't really know how to draw it out over the course of a season. And that's really important. Like when people are studying TV, they shouldn't just look at pilots. And I still do this to this day. I do it with my friends' shows. I've looked at Game of Thrones that Dan and Dave did, and I've analyzed the episodes and seen okay, when does this happen? When does this happen? Because I'm not just looking for the rhythm of a episode. You're looking for the rhythm of the entire season, right? And to study other people is one way of getting a feel for how complex that is and how much you have to embed in episode 1 if you're going to have it pay off in episode 8. So there's a degree of study there that is different to a film, right? A feature, which you don't have to take that into consideration. And I think, I'm a producer and I'll help with the writing and directing where necessary, but again, this has to be somebody's passion project, right? Because I can't show run for someone else if I'm a producer. They need to want to do it and want to live it and be, there's no call to anybody else that you can make to fix your final 3 episodes, right? If you're a showrunner, it's on you. There's no one else to look at. I mean, you can look at the producer will help, but what you really want is somebody who feels the gravity of that position and is just really wholeheartedly invested in telling that story and knows that they have to see it through, right? Knows that it's not just about getting an episode on the air, but it's about telling the story.
A lot of the writers and streaming executives I've spoken to in the past, as well as ahead of our session, one sort of area that constantly comes up in conversation where people just seem to be trying to figure it out is the idea of the writer's room. Which is, again, a relatively new concept here, sort of maybe 5-6 years old. So I just wanted to first ask you on a very generic level, because I know it's a very case-by-case basis, depends on the show and a whole bunch of stuff, but what, according to you, does a good, effective, efficient writer's room look like? How many writers would you have in there? What is that hierarchy like? What are those timelines like? Because I still think everyone seems to sort of, be going for it in a different way.
I mean, everyone does go for it in a different way. And it kind of depends on your work style, too. I'm very in my head, and I tend to explore things by writing. So even when I'm in a room, I'll project my laptop onto a screen, and instead of saying the pitches, I'll type them, and people just know. I can't think by talking. It's weird. There's some kind of disconnect in my brain. So I'm not actually a typical showrunner in that sense, right? I've worked with Jonah, my husband, who is very much a showrunner. He likes to stand there and talk and solicit ideas and this and that. And I'm more like a burrower. I like a small small group. I think honestly maybe because I'm just more internal and a little bit shyer. So there are so many different ways to do it. I think one of the things that's interesting is there's a kind of hierarchy in who's more senior, who's more junior. It's not necessarily where the best ideas come from, though. So I try to make sure that I'm listening to everybody. But there's also a moment where sometimes the room just devolves into chaos if people are so into their own idea, but you're trying to keep them on a certain track, right? Because you want to be polite, you don't want to cut people off, but at the same time, like at a certain point, a decision must be made and you have to keep making the show. And you're surrounded by brilliant people with wonderful ideas and their own strong opinions on where to go. And it can feel like herding cats, And so there's a little bit of, managerial panache that has to occur in saying, yes, that's wonderful, but let's get back to more this area, of this. And that can be hard, writers are sensitive, and I truly believe like everybody has their own story to tell, but when you're in a writer's room, you are servicing somebody else's story. And it's a bit of a social tact thing where you kind of watch to see, am I helping right now, or am I talking just to talk, or am I, and trust me, I've been a staff writer on many shows, and I'm sure I've annoyed a lot of people, and helped some people. So it's a delicate dance. But I prefer personally, and now after the strike, there are some guild minimums to how many people you must have in a room, which I know a lot of people felt some reservations about. I like a smaller room. For me, it's so important to have that trust. You almost become a hive mind, And for me, I don't like having a lot of ego in my work. I don't like to think of there as being a separation. Like if there's a good pitch that didn't come from me, I'm overjoyed because it's going to the show. It's glory for everyone, right? And it's exciting to me to be around people whose ideas are better than my own, or that enhance my own. To me, that's a wonderful thing, and I also believe in giving credit to those writers. There are some showrunners who don't give credit as much to other writers, but to me, the reason why you're a showrunner is you're a manager and you're giving them their start and you're creating a record for them. So even if you are rewriting them, it doesn't matter because they've been there, they've done the work, and you're trying to help them build a career.
Does, in terms of sort of making and staffing that room, does genre play a difference at all? The reason I ask is everything here that was ever made in terms of a show in the last 5 years has either been a crime drama, looked like a crime drama, like it's always, we love gangsters, we love guns, it seems to be the only thing everyone's greenlighting. So does that, if you were making a 10-episode crime drama, for example, does that have a bearing on what you think an efficient room looks like, even hierarchy-wise, or is it really a case-by-case basis?
I think it so much depends on the writers that you have. I was looking at we have a crime drama right now that we're looking at, and sometimes you have somebody who's great with dialogue, right? And that's great, and great with character, and that's great. But you still need somebody else then who's great with reversals, especially in a crime drama, right? You need somebody who is looking at the math of the crime and the finding out about the crime and the investigation. And that's a very different muscle to, dialogue. There are some people who are good at everything across the board, right? But other people have strong spikes in one area or another. Sometimes you look for somebody with actual work experience in that area, or experience in what that character is going through, so that they can speak from a personal place and tell you about it, right? And so I think it's more about trying to find this bouquet of writers by picking people who are bringing certain things to the table and mesh well together.
Another thing that comes down to writers' rooms, which I've heard from just sort of friends and writers a lot, is that sort of painfully familiar scenario where people will say, look, I'm a young writer, I've got myself in a writer's room for a big platform, I can't believe it's happening, except the power dynamics are terrible, nobody's taking, it's not about ideation, I'm expected to transcribe. This tends to happen a lot more with female writers, unfortunately, and and it's literally I'm expected to execute, and it's just not an environment where I feel like I can contribute. How do I now? And here, that mad dash to get your first credit is, you're expected to compromise so much because that makes a big difference. So, as a young writer or a female writer, how do I navigate that? How do I figure out how to be assertive without feeling like I'm gonna lose my job?
That's a very tricky thing to navigate for anybody. I think some battles you're just never going to win, right? There are some people that you work for, and if you're working for somebody who's really sexist or really racist, you're not going to make them unsexist or unracist by the beauty of your prose, right? They're going to read it and dismiss it because they will have an inherently sexist or racist gaze, right?
Wouldn't that be amazing, though?
Yeah, it'd be like, I've changed. Yeah, I love women. So I think part of the most difficult thing is, as a writer, it's a mentally fragile job, right? There's no answer in the back of the book, and I think a lot of us, we're writers because, we're somewhat sensitive souls who are trying to transcribe our, observations or experiences in this very solitary way. It's just you and a page, right? It's not necessarily for like gregarious people with unassailable confidence. And so I would say one of the really difficult things when you're working in a somewhat hostile environment would be, these are your bosses, or at least for me, and I'm like, half Chinese. I had a very Asian upbringing, which was like, respect your superiors, kind of, and so if they were saying I was not worthy, I certainly felt not worthy, right? It was hard for me to think, no, rubbish, like you're just a jerk, and it really, this is part of the ongoing difficulty of being a writer, is that it's easy to doubt oneself, right? If not in a room that's hostile, then maybe the critical reception of something sets you back, or some like literally somebody could say one thing and it could stay with you forever about one line that you wrote, just like, oh my God, I'm a hack. And so when you are in a somewhat hostile environment, that really exacerbates it. It's really hard, So I think the thing that's important, and I'm being realistic here in that I've been in those environments and I haven't been able to, it's not as easy always as blow it all up and leave, right? Because for sometimes that means career suicide, right? I'm definitely not saying one should put up with, sexual harassment or things like that, but there's a certain amount of having to figure out how much of it you're going to let in. Like everybody has to decide for themselves, what is the healthiest way for me to proceed, right? And it's often a navigation, and you don't always win. I've definitely come home crying from jobs. But the things that I found that are helpful are to have a peer group that you love and admire, who are generous. There are generous writers, and honestly, there are not generous writers, right? And that's okay. It's okay to be a not generous writer, but it's not great if you're a not generous writer paired with a generous writer, right? Like, generous writers should stick together and not generous writers should stick together, because then nobody's feelings get hurt. Everybody's okay, And that's truly what I feel. Like, I'm not trying to even put a moralistic thing on it. It's just how it is. So I found a lot of very generous writer friends, and we celebrate in each other's successes and weep together over our failures. And then the other thing I would say is, let it be motivation. There's a certain amount of working up the ranks that you have to do. You're writing in somebody else's voice on a show, even if you think my voice is much better than your voice, sir, right? But your job is to, get your paycheck, write those words, and keep chugging, hopefully with minimum trauma. And if you can do that, then in some ways I think of being in a room as a day job, and then your night job is the same as everybody's night job, right? You're a dreaming writer, writing about your own things in the evening, late at night, and you're completely free to write in whatever voice you want, about whatever story you want. And that's what I did for a long time in terms of writing my own things as a sort of unpaid night job for my staffing.
You had a great quote, which I heard you talk about in a recent masterclass. I'm paraphrasing you, so please correct me. You basically said that after you face so much rejection, and the reason it stuck with me is something I really resonated with, and I feel a lot of young writers here would as well. You said that after you face so much rejection, you really, after a point, thought that to survive in Hollywood, you have to be an asshole, and kindness is not rewarded. And then you realize it's not that. It's the fact that Hollywood is agnostic to assholes, so it doesn't matter if you're kind or not. And I think a lot of writers here would definitely resonate with that as well. You've mentioned showrunners a lot. I don't have a cool way of phrasing this question. What the heck is a showrunner? Because everyone here seems to have a different definition of it. Right. As I told you yesterday, there are sort of so many people who describe it as what I think it is, which is the creative captain of that ship. And there are others who, will say that, no, I just enable the show, or I'm producing it, or I'm the sort of the conduit between the production and the sort of writers. So what is that role exactly?
So I can say what it is in America. So basically, film is typically a director's medium, right? And TV in America is a showrunner's medium, a writer's medium. Showrunner is always a writer, first and foremost. And the reason for that is when you're living with a show week after week after week, it's driven by that narrative, right? It's not just a one-off thing where a director comes in, does something, interprets a script, and then leaves. You're being carried along because of the script, right? That's why you tune in week after week. And so, so because it's a writer's medium, when you kind of work your way up the ranks, you become a bit of a producer, and your title changes to producer as well. Executive producer is what you call a showrunner. There's no actual term, no actual label showrunner. You'll never see showrunner in the credits. Showrunner is just the person you call when the shit is going down and you need someone to fix it. That's who you are. That's who the showrunner is.
That's
the network calls them.
Description for that.
Yeah, network calls them. The actors call them. The directors call them. Everybody calls the showrunner. The showrunner is the person with the least amount of sleep. But it's wonderful though, because you basically take your vision, you write your pilot, you choose the room, you assemble the room, you hire the director, you hire the actors, you hire the team, and you run the room every day. You talk to the network. You are going to get yelled at if you're not on time and on budget. So you're also doing the finances of it. You're working with the line producer and looking at the money. You're knowing the shooting schedule and knowing that at any moment it might be 2 a.m. and you're going to have to cut some scenes because you're over budget and you need to save for the finale, right? And the director of the episode that you're cutting the budget for is going to be mad at you, and you're going to have to deal with that, right? And the actor who had that scene is also going to be upset, and you're going to have to deal with that. But it really just involves oversight of every single aspect of the show. And so there's no, it's very autorial, right? Especially if you're a director too and you're directing your show. Also, by the way, you're in post, you're looking at visual effects, you're choosing music. Every single aspect is run by the showrunner. And now there are roles I'm a producer as well. And when I produce, I try to be honestly very respectful of the showrunner, right? There are some producers who will come in and take something away from someone, and if it's going way off the rails or the person has gone completely insane, then yes, I'll step in. Or if they ask me to step in and help, I'll step in. But for the most part, for me, being a producer is about giving advice, kind of helping with the network sometimes, and it's hard, especially for a first-time showrunner, to manage all the things that are going to get thrown at them. And so a producer kind of helps for that. In the best of circumstances, a producer is an advocate for a showrunner and the show itself, also slightly guiding the showrunner in order to ensure the longevity of the show if there's a problem.
I really appreciate you breaking it down like that. Is the showrunner always the head writer, or is it, again, very, very case by case?
Okay, so there are times when there is a writer who really dislikes producing, right? So Damon Lindelof is a writer who I know who doesn't like to be on set, right? He doesn't really like that aspect of it. So, he really stays with the writer's room. He'll still, I'm sure, be involved with casting and choosing the director and all those choices, but he'll be less active on set, and he'll choose maybe a producer to work on set and deal with everyday problems from actor or production while he stays more focused on writing. So that's another version of it that happens. But the showrunner is still the head writer, and you're basically hiring a producer to come in and just kind of regulate and help out on set. You do have to be a little bit careful, though, that the producer that you choose is an ally and not somebody who's going to try to step on your creative freedom. There are times when networks have their kind of go-to producers, and they become their go-to producers because they're kind of, trying to, make the cheapest widget they can, and, call the network and be like, they're crazy, but I can talk them down. Like, that kind of thing. There's a kind of an old system where there's a lot of, like, especially in America, there's like a lot of old white guy producers who, as far as I can tell, honestly don't do that much and take a huge chunk of money.
You're preaching to the choir, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably, I'm not sure it's great for me to say this, but it's true. And so I try not to work with those people, and especially when you're starting off as a showrunner, people will try to pair you with those people. And it's something to be careful of.
The other thing that's happened here, again, because sort of it's been a feature film world here in the past, the director is always seen as the big dog. And in a series world, a lot of big shows, most of them, it's still the director. It's still considered a director's baby. And there have been many times, because that is a very sort of specific shift in the power dynamics, where if it is a writer's medium, as you'd hope, the showrunner should be leading that ship. And then you have directors who come in who are responsible for individual episodes, or maybe 2-3 episodes, who are answerable to the showrunner. And there were so many examples of shows here where there is a clash, where I'm the head writer and I am the showrunner, and I'm having a sort of a clash with the director who's tech. So how, if I was the showrunner, what advice would you have to navigate that, where you have a director who really is trying to take charge because they're used to it?
Okay, that's tricky, and that also happens in the States, right? It kind of, there are certain, this has happened to my friends. They're a showrunner, but they'll bring on some very authorial, often male director, right? And that person will commandeer the set and talk to the network like she's crazy, she doesn't know what she's doing, and kind of run away with the show. It's quite disheartening when that happens to them. And sometimes the directors are really good, right? But they're making their version of the show. They think they're right. My friends who this happened to would disagree and be quite sad. I think it's really important to choose a director that you respect and get along well with, to check out their reputation, and to be very clear what you want from them, to be able to have a certain amount of transparency, right? Like, there are some people who maybe you're fine. Maybe it's fine to be the showrunner, map out the course of the show, and then hand it over to a visionary director that you love, who's gonna take his spin at it and make it great. You're still the showrunner. It's just the director is also taking a really big piece of it, but he's not rewriting the scripts, right? He could give you notes to rewrite the scripts, and you can take them or not take them, right? Depending on if you like them, and also if, hopefully the studio believes in you as a writer, right? If they don't, then you're in a bit of trouble. So yeah, it's a lot of times if the director is only doing one episode, right, they're not going to be there for the next episode. Like it's you, like the buck stops with you. So those power struggles are a little less in some ways if they're just doing a pilot. If they're doing every single episode, then in a way they are also being so authorial that maybe they should have a bit of more of a discussion with you in the show. I mean, for me, Westworld's pilot was directed by my husband, so that was a very clear, synergy. It was great, and it was just an extension of the writing. And when I've seen other directors, Peripheral was directed by Vincenzo Natali, who I had worked with as a director on Westworld, and I knew he had a great eye, and it was a lovely fellow to work with, and so I knew that he'd be great at directing that show.
So I'm just going to do a quick time check to make sure I don't get shouted at. We're okay. I just want to make sure we have time for questions at the end. To be fair to the other side, just coming back to writers' rooms, I did speak to a couple of platform executives to get their perspective as well. And I interviewed Aparna Purohit, who's the head of Amazon Prime Video India, a couple of months ago. And she said one aspect that still hasn't really been instilled here, which I wanted to get your take on, was the efficiency and discipline of churning out future seasons quick. So the fact is you have one show out, season 1 is out, it's great, but then you but keeping that machine moving so you can have subsequent seasons out relatively soon, which, as you said, it's an insane schedule there. So how quick is that timeline? And what advice would you have for keeping that writer's room going for future seasons? And what does that look like?
Well, I mean, my slight pushback to that is also you can't keep going if the network isn't paying for writers, right? And so what often happens is you feel like you're just gonna stop. But you'll write a season and you'll be like, here it is. And then they'll wanna wait to see how it does and yada, 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 right? And then if it airs well, they're like, oh my God, we gotta get a second season. And where are the scripts? And it's like, we asked for money to start a room, to write the scripts, to get into prep, but you said no. And then you just waited. And so, for me, it's like, there's a certain amount of time that any season needs, and having a transparent dialogue with your executives about those needs, right, is very helpful. Like I've had, and I think this is also where a producer can help, but I do very much I'm a pretty straight shooter when it comes to my dealings with networks. There's no way to hide the money or hide the time. Everything's gonna out in the end anyway. And because I have a business background, I am very invested in, I will check all the numbers and everything. But it does sometimes involve advocating very hard with the network and saying, you don't need to greenlight us for another season, but we're gonna need a writer's room. You're gonna have to support us if you want us to be ready to hit the ground running in the event of success. And they don't always do that, But then, okay, so say you do have what you need. If you want seasons to be churned out again and again, then you really have no hiatus, right? You don't get one. The second you're done with season 1, you maybe take 2 weeks and you're back in the room for season 2. To me, that's how you get a show on the air every year. And if there's any kind of stalling in that process, then it is what it is. It's not going to happen.
At that rate, on average, how long does it take for one season from the point of getting it greenlit from a network or platform to that show being, say, delivered to the platform? How long does that take, roughly?
It depends on the show.
Yeah.
It depends on, honestly, often the networks will have their own slates and their own plan on when to release things optimally. So that's also part of the calculation. It doesn't necessarily just get aired the second it's ready,
What about just from the point that it's greenlit to the point that it's ready? When they release it is a whole other calculation.
So I would say it's funny because you can make an episode and maybe in 2 months see it on the air, right? So when you're doing procedural, that's what it is. You're not finishing the whole season first and then airing it. You're literally running and gunning, editing, and then it's on the air. There's no time to finish everything in advance, you know?
But what about that 10-episode streaming world?
10-episode streaming world, I would say, 6 months for a writer's room. And then maybe another 6 months, about a year to shoot. I mean, everything's different. It depends on the.
It's very hard to generalize it.
Yeah, and like how ambitious the production is, and if it's international, yada yada yada. But I'd say it's about 9 months to a year, same as to incubate life, I guess.
Nicely done. No, I was talking to an executive at a platform here, and he said now it's probably down to, on average, in his experience, 18 months, not including the extremes. Yeah, so I guess we're not doing too badly, hopefully.
Yeah, that's not so bad. I mean, certainly that's Westworld took a long time, but it's also, there's this saying in America. How does it go? You can have it fast, good, or cheap. Choose two, right? So it's like if you want it to be good and fast, like it's either cheap or you have to like really spend the money, right? So they have the resources to do it. So it's a negotiation with the network. It truly is. And I don't mean like a negotiation the network might construe it this way as like we're playing a game. But for me, it's like, you tell me what kind of show you want. Like what air date do you want? You tell me, and then I'll tell you realistically what it takes to get to that air date, what resources we need, what schedule we need. And so it's a bit of an iterative process.
I will ask you just one more question, and then we can open it up to questions from the audience. And I've got a bunch of questions people have submitted to me as well. You said in an interview that the good thing about being a showrunner is you make your own rules. So is there anything you do specifically, either when it comes to writing or production or any part of the showrunning process, any sort of small specific practices that you wished more shows did?
Oh, gosh. I guess I like to hire a very diverse writer's room and a diverse crew and cast. I think that's helped the strength of my writing and the shows, and it's important to me. It's also the more diverse the room, the less kind of marginalized the voices feel. I remember being like the only woman or only person of color in rooms, and it's hard to you always need what I call like a seconder, like somebody who will be like, yes, and reiterate what you said. Otherwise, there's this habit, it happens to a lot of women and minorities of like, I call it the zephyr effect. You'll pitch something and it'll be like a little zephyr wafts through the room and no one hears it. And then some dude will be like, what if, and say the thing you just said, not even knowing that he's just repeating the zephyr, and everybody like, brilliant, it's brilliant. And so that's the zephyr effect. And in order to avoid being a zephyr, you need a seconder. You need the guy who people do listen to be like, did you hear what this person said? Did you hear that zephyr? This was that thing. And so I think having allies on a show too who will do that and support kind of new voices is important and very valuable.
Have you ever had that self-important, annoying guy who goes, I think what she's trying to say is, just to like repeat what you're saying?
Of course.
With that, we will open it up to the audience. If not, I have a whole bunch of questions people have spoken. We'll take the one right at the back first.
Hi, my name is Momita. Thank you for such beautifully curated questions. The answers were so insightful. I have a question. Since the lead writer is a showrunner, right? A lot of times, very good stories come from writers like, he is supposed to be the lead writer, but he has not done a show before. So it is a little difficult for the platform to show some faith into the writer to be the lead writer or to be the showrunner per se. How do we navigate that as producers?
You're here to solve all of our problems, by the way.
Yes, that is tricky, and that is not just here. That happens in America a lot. And look, The truth is, showrunning is a very difficult job. And if you can find somebody to co-showrun with you, at first you might think they're stealing my glory, but at one point you will think, thank God I can go home, But you'll only feel that way if they're actually a great collaborator and you're happy to share your success with them, And I think that's where choosing your partners is wise. Like, I did Westworld with Jonah, and I don't think either of us would have survived it alone, right? For The Peripheral, our showrunner and head writer, Scott, is a novelist. And also the biggest introvert ever. I literally could never get the guy to go out to lunch with me because he won't leave his house. So he really does not have that desire to, showrun in that sense. So we paired him with somebody who's very supportive of showrunners, and they became co-showrunners. But the key to pairing them with someone is, like, the person we paired him with didn't want to usurp his voice or take away his credit. He just wanted to be an ally. And those kinds of executive producers who will come in and co-showrun, when they're generous and good and a good fit with the writer, that's not so bad. If, however, it's not a good fit and they're not generous, it is hell on earth. And it's often quite hard, honestly, to know what you're getting into. As producers, my company and I, we try to look out for the showrunners in that sense and make sure that they're paired with somebody who will be supportive and not detract from their work.
Any others? We'll take one right from the front. Oh, okay, you're there already. Or just, yeah.
You're confusing him. Just making him run
That's
back
a
and
test
forth.
you passed.
So hello, my name is Akash, and the question I have is, with the advent of streaming, and you sort of worked on both the worlds, like you have been the bridge. So you've seen the network where 1 week, 1 episode, and now Netflix just drops the whole season. So how are the networks, what do I call it? The requirements of the networks from a creative standpoint, that how has it changed your writing?
So generally, I mean, one of the strangest ways in which it changes writing is, before, when I was writing, say, Pushing Daisies, right, on network television, there were advertisements, right? There's commercials. And the commercials fall at very regular intervals. You kind of know there's going to be 4 commercial breaks or whatever. It was a while ago, so I can't remember exactly how many. But that does something very, very interesting to your act structure, right? It becomes a 5-act thing because okay, at minute 10, there's going to be a damn commercial. And so what I have to do is have some kind of little cliffhanger or something to keep the momentum going. So it's like, dun, 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 and they'll stay for the commercial and come back. So it led to a sort of punctuation in the break that revolved around that form. Ironically, without commercials, you don't have that, right? And what is kind of a bummer for me now is when they interject, like, after the fact, commercials at random times in things, because it's just really distracting. It'll, like, I'd rather know if a commercial's coming and cut the music accordingly and set the tone accordingly. But when you're working on something that doesn't have that, it's just a different rhythm. But I still don't mind having had that kind of commercial training, because it reminds you not to be too languorous at times and to keep it moving, keep it exciting in certain moments. But aside from that, I think I don't really feel a big difference in it. Whether they air it together at the same time and drop it, or they do it week to week, I think it more affects, if you air it week after week sequentially, what I think is cool is it markets itself, right? If you find a show that lands, it becomes the water cooler talk, and people, word of mouth spreads and gets people. it makes it more of a cultural thing that you can enjoy sort of real time concomitantly with others, which I like. That's exciting, right? It feels like it's woven into the timeline of this world. That being said, there are sometimes like spoilers and stuff where if you dropped it all at the same time, you could avoid more spoilers because everybody knows when everything's coming out at the same time, your friends are going to kill you if you give a spoiler. So people are weirdly more quiet about what's going to happen. So they both have their benefits. I think a lot of people now really like to binge watch, but I don't know. I just do what the network tells me to in that respect in terms of what their model is.
I'll do you one better in terms of writing for the commercial. Here in movie theaters, our films release in 2 parts, and so there is an interval, and that's built into the screenplay. And sometimes in that interval, in the theater, they will have the actor from the film in an ad, which takes you out of it. I'm pretty sure they do that just to piss me off.
Wow, that's crazy.
I wish I was making that up. Yes, we'll take a question from the middle there.
Hi.
Okay, somebody else has a mic. Okay, we'll take you next. Yeah.
Yes. Am I audible to you? Yeah.
Very much so, yeah.
Yeah. So my question here is, as a creative writer, we get 3-4 ideas and we cultivate them. Finally, we reach out to a point that we have 4-5 different ideas, and those are equally important to us. And as a writer has a love towards his own ideas, he can't see it in a different perspective. So how to choose one out of those 4-5 ideas, and what is the criteria, or how we can choose amongst all those ideas?
First of all, you're lucky, and can I have one of your 5 ideas? I am seldom confronted with 5 ideas that I would like to pursue equally. I think I think you just have to do which one you're the most excited about then and think you can finish, right? I think one thing that's always a little terrifying for a writer is you start to write something and then literally any idea looks better than the one you are currently writing. Any idea. Like a commercial would look better to write than that. And so, you know, there's that thing of when I start a screenplay, I truly, if I'm not going to abandon it, I'm ready to get to the end, right? Before looking at any other idea, like I really just want to finish it. Because the allure of that other idea is always very strong. But I guarantee once you wade into that idea, you're still going to have those knots and bits of writer's block and despairing moments where you think it's not working. I think that's par for the course with every idea. So I just try to go for my favorite one, the one that seems most timely and interesting to me, and see it through to the end without getting distracted.
Hi, firstly, thank you so much for a wonderful session. So many wonderful questions were asked, but one question, that I have always been tempted to ask writers is the question about writers and actors, and how they work in pairs. Westworld is a show, wherein you had the luxury of working with so many great actors, female, male, wonderful actors, and YouTube is full of, those breakdowns of Anthony Hopkins, Ford, and, Man in the Black and his origins and backstories. So I just want to understand from you how big a luxury it is, to have these wonderful actors at your disposal, and if you could also give some, maybe examples, if as and when you faced any difficulties, by, when you had these so many wonderful actors, but maybe something, didn't work out well. If you can, give any example from your time on working on Westworld.
Something that didn't work out well? Oh, you want the tea? Okay.
Who's sleeping with who?
Yeah, exactly. That's great. I hope we're recording. Are we rolling on this? I have loved working with all of my actors. I'm not lying. I'll tell you a story about one that was off to a rough start later, but I am being honest, and I think the reason why I've had a good experience with my actors, and I've had actors get mad at me and yell, not on my own shows, but on a different show. But I think that when it's my set, when it's my show, to me, everyone is a person, right? You can be the most famous actor in the world, and you will get the same respect as the craft service person, right? Because we are all people, and we're all doing a job together. And, you know, but it's true, right?
That really wouldn't fly here, but I appreciate it.
But I think it's also, it's important, right, to remind, and it starts with you, right? If you're not putting on airs, then it should shame other people into not doing it, right? I've also worked with very decent people. I do have a rule about not working with assholes, you know. So if somebody's famously toxic, no matter how great an actor they are, I will never work with them. So I've worked with some lovely people. I also think, to be honest, like, it's hard to be an actor. Your face is out there. People have all sorts of suppositions about you. You're treated very differently from a normal human being. And in some ways, I think it's a relief for an actor to be able to talk to a showrunner, and the showrunner is going to treat them like a normal person, right? Like, they have to treat them like a normal person. Because otherwise, how do you give notes? How do you demand that they show up on set on time so that you can make the show? And, you know, you have to have a mutual respect as people that is literally equal. Otherwise, it doesn't work. And so I'm also very explicit about that. You know, if I feel that might be a problem, I will talk about it in an initial interview in casting. I'll be like, this is how it works with me. You know, if you're not okay with that, that's okay. We shouldn't work together. It's no harm, no foul, you know? But, you know, I had not everybody likes you, you know? At the same time, you have to respect people, but you can't guarantee people will like you. And I remember working with one actor, who will remain nameless, but he's quite iconic. And he just didn't like me, right? And I knew it. And some people just don't like you. They get an impression and they're not into it, you know? And then I had to direct him. And I was scared. And so I think the thing you have to be as a showrunner or a director or whatever is brave and forthright, right? So rather than hiding from the fact that I knew, not because he was talking about me or anything, I could just tell from the energy that he was not quite I think he was like, what is this girl doing here? So I asked him out to breakfast, and I was like, I'm not sure that you like me. That's irrelevant right now, right? You don't need to like me. I am just going to tell you that we're going to be working together very closely in a moment, and you can find, you know, personal things you don't like about me, but you're never going to work with somebody who's more prepared or more on it or more honest with their feedback. And if you can respect that, then we're going to be fine. And I think clearing the air, just being very matter of fact and just talking to him like a regular person, you know, in the end, he was like, "You're my favorite director." You know, like, you know, everybody's a person ultimately, right? And I don't think people think they want to be treated like deities sometimes, but they don't. You know, it's a lonely life there. And, you know, I think camaraderie and participating together in a creative venture is far more fulfilling than being some kind of god in the clouds all alone.
Sorry, who has the mic?
Hi.
We've got one there, and I think we'll take one more from the center. Yeah, go for it.
Hi, this is a great session, Suchin. Thank you so much for inviting me for this. So I have two questions, but they're very short. Because I am a writer, but I'm also somebody who gets pitches because I work for a production house. So I just want to know, basically, that, you know, when you read screenplay books like Save the Cat and stuff, you get a lot of, your first pitch immediately is like, this story is like this meets that, like The Office meets Wedding Crashers or whatever, just coming an example. Is that still relevant if we are trying to pitch a show to a network or something like that? Do we still need those references down pat in our pitching process? Firstly, that. And secondly, like Suchin mentioned, right now in India, crime dramas are everywhere. That is what everybody's making. And a lot of it is based on a small town India and, you know, everything that happens there. And I know for a fact that I read at least 10 subjects on the same thing. So it just puts me off in a way that I don't want to read it once I know that this is about that world. So how do you differentiate between similar, similar subjects on the same genre, but you know that this has gold while the other wouldn't? Just that. I just want to pick your brain on this.
No, that's a good question. I mean, in terms of the this meets this kind of pitch, I'll maybe do it towards the end of a pitch a little bit, but for the most part, I think I'll leave it to the network or studio to come up with that, right? Like, because what if they don't like, Reservoir Dogs, right? I don't want to be like, this is Reservoir Dogs meets your other most hated movie, right? So, hopefully they'll like it, and then they'll think of movies they like and be like, it's this meets this in a wonderful way. So, yeah, and I mean, honestly, some of my favorite movies were not commercially successful, so I don't want to be like, it's this flop and this flop, I'm not going to say that. So sometimes it's helpful in relaying tone, but I don't think it's necessary all the time. And then, wait, what was the other question?
It was about like a crime drama puts you off, but what if it's a good one, right? What if it's like the trend that you want to tear your hair out, but actually there's something there, but you just don't have the energy to...
I mean, it's tough because I think if something is unique and great, it tends to pop. But this is my problem with like algorithms too, honestly, is like this is just my complaining session now. But these kind of like algorithmic models, algorithm is just a fancy word for they look at precedent and correlations with success and then repeat it, which is another word for like kind of cliched, right? But formulaic. It's a formula, and so it makes formulaic things, is what an algorithm does. And maybe formulaic things are successful. We've had a lot of superhero movies. We've had a lot of, so there's a place for that. There's a place for that. But I would also say that the most successful shows are the things that an algorithm by definition would not find. They're these black swan outlier things that come in and give the audience a taste for something they never knew they wanted. And so I think, the big breakout hits are always like that, right? And so it's of course hard to get those on the air because you need somebody who's willing to take a chance and go with their gut. And you need, when writing it, to go with your own gut. So it's rare, but it happens. And to me, those tend to be the most exciting shows out there. So there's honestly, there's a place for both. Craft goes a long way. Like you can have a million procedurals, but even if they are somewhat formulaic, if they are well crafted or the characters are written so well that you can't help but love them, that's engaging TV, So yeah, they both work.
I think we have time for just one more question somewhere in the middle. Just before that, I just want to let you know, we have an algorithm here. It's called Mirzapur. It's a gangster drama. Came out 6 years ago. Everyone's still trying to make it. It's very annoying. Last question to you. No pressure.
Hi, Lisa. In recent years, we have seen a trend where there are 2 or more genres in a film, which I think it helps to give it a wider audience or more plot beats to keep the audience engaged. So my question is it a necessity today to package your story in a genre to make it more sellable?
I don't think it has to be packaged in a genre. I mean, genre is it's pretty niche, and genre doesn't necessarily always command critical respect, right? Like there's sci-fi and fantasy aren't typically the world of accolades, right? There's a kind of like general, more realistic drama that goes towards, and comedy. Look, it's weird. I like to play with genre. Sometimes people know I'm doing it and sometimes they don't. Like genre is very funny to me, right? Because it's a lane that you inherit from the storytellers that have come before you. And maybe like the 3-act structure, there's something a priori about it, something that makes sense and is sort of finding something in nature that just seems to be. But also maybe it's like a weird patriarchal like relic of a way of separating the world, like, can there be a real love story that's also an action film, can there be sci-fi that is serious and contemplative or humorous, like, can there, I think these divisions, and also, as a woman, right, when I asked, people assume you have a genre, right? Like, genre is weirdly tied up with identity politics in ways that people don't talk about. And it's also an artifice that was inherited from history, right? And from a certain rarefied group of published and respected authors, right? So genre, being able to package things in genre helps marketing and it helps sell a thing, right? Being able to know squarely where it sits and how they advertise it. But at the same time, I somewhat lament that. I do think that there's something else out there, but to strive for it is tricky, and it's harder to get made, and it also might not. People sometimes, right now, audiences seem to really want to know what they're getting. Maybe it's because the world is so uncertain and terrifying that they just want to feel, give me this time of escape, like, tickle my funny bone or make me cry or have superheroes solve the problems of the world, right? Like, just do it and give me the feeling that I need at the end. That might be what we need right now. Like, sometimes I need that. There's no judgment for me on any of this, but whereas blending genres, when you don't have, it's like listening to a new kind of music. How if you play a song enough times, people tend to start liking that song, regardless of whether you liked the song initially or not. It's like a trick of radio play and how pop stars are made, right? And it's the same thing with we're used to those rhythms of like those flavors, that palette of genre, but there's a part of me that's like, tear it all down, blow it all up. It's not real. And so I think there's some fun to be had there.
We are overrunning, but I'd like to take one more question. So unless somebody shouts at me, I will take one. If it's a quick one, yeah, let's just take that one.
Sorry. Hi, Lisa. Thank you so much for your time and your wisdom. My question to you is with context to the WGA strike. I think it's the first time a lot of us got to even see words like residuals, which we have no idea what that is.
Not a thing here.
So, and we're really happy for you guys that y'all were able to fight for those rights and get them. What happens here for writers, a lot of the people will be able to relate, is that when we do develop our pilots or our Bibles, and we spend a lot of time and effort in putting it together, and then we go ahead to try and sell it. And there's often not much guarantee that we would be involved in any aspect of its future, in any aspect of other seasons. So what would you tell us should be non-negotiable for us as writers to have those rights for our IP that we're selling?
That's a very good question. I think part of this is realpolitik, right? Like, you're not in a system that is geared towards helping you out. And as I know, the writer strikes sound good, and they are good, but there is that happens in the U.S. too, truly. So I think, first of all, one of the things you can do is, and I did this with my feature, I deliberately just dropped it everywhere on the same day in the hopes of getting a competitive situation, which I did. And then because I had a bidding war for the script from several parties, I was able to negotiate my continued involvement in said script, right? And that's one way to do it, right? And that helps also for if you're a woman, right? Women tend to get paid less than men. I know that's happened to me. And so that's why I like doing an open market competitive bidding thing. I'm like, let the work speak for itself then. So that is one way to do it. The other thing I would say is, and this is, I guess, more to the production companies then, right? I think we're in this business for a reason. We're in it to make stories that endure, delight, and move. We're not making toothbrushes, right? And for that, you want the best storytellers you can get. Production companies have competition just like writers do, right? If I wanted the best storytellers in India, it sounds like what I would do is try to build a brand about supporting those voices and nurturing them in a hope to attract the best and brightest and get the best shows. And we can all become filthy rich together, you know? I think there is a space in the market for changing the way that people approach it. Is that if everybody is doing one thing and valuing one thing, then I think a interesting production house should try a different tact, right? Or maybe a fledgling production house should try a different tact. And so that's me not really talking to you, but talking about the industry in general. I think that would be an interesting way to do it, because I do think that story sells. I think that underlying which movies do well and which don't, you know, writers are very unsung heroes. I think that writing is the thing. I think it all rests on the script, you know, and I say this as somebody who loves directing and loves producing. I think it's all about the writing. I think it's so fundamentally important and underappreciated, and sometimes undervalued. And so for me, it's just a smart business move to value writers in order to attract the best ones.
Thank you, everyone. Lisa, thank you for the worlds. Thank you for the wisdom. Thank you for the stories.
Thank you.